Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of featuring bagpipes, looking at a band that we were introduced to last week. We're going to return to 1914, the black metal band that primarily writes, or maybe even exclusively writes, about World War I. Today we will be exploring the track The Green Fields of France. Let's see what 1914 is bringing to the table today. A really gnarly sound, especially the guitar work over to the left. It almost feels like there's extra distortion and compression over there that I don't know, it feels very crunchy. Also said this is black metal, and maybe I'm misremembering that. It was only last week, though. This feels closer to death, though. Yeah, you hear that grit and grime underneath everything? Yeah, the bagpipe actually works rather well against the metal that they're dropping right here. Really interesting that they bring in the blackened section so rarely. Yeah, really bringing in the groove in this middle section. Yeah, this is the second groovy section in a row. Got the layered vocals there. We got some rogue screams in the background. I'm really glad that the bagpipes keep popping up. I was a little concerned they might just be an intro idea. Okay. Ooh, really interesting triplet there. Yeah, it wasn't a triplet. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so it's actually a really slow hemiola. 2 hits in the span of 3 beats. Yeah, so that wasn't entirely what I was expecting. Um, we really didn't have any blackened sections in there at all. This is pretty much straight up death metal throughout, a majority of it with a little dashing of industrial there in the middle, and then moving towards doomish stuff maybe there at the end, but I mean we could even just call that slow death. Um, so yeah, just like I mentioned, really far outside where my expectations were set. So my curiosity got the best of me. I had to go look it up. Rate Music has them listed as both black and death, and the one we checked out last week was very much blackened. Uh, had an orchestra too, or a symphonic element to it, which I didn't remember off the top of my head. So this is actually a very different side of 1942 than we checked out last time. Now, this one primarily focuses on weight and groove, where the weight doesn't come from an intensity of repetition, it comes through a depth of pitch where it almost feels like our guitars are down tuned further than they were last time we heard them. And that seems completely infeasible. Well, no, because you could just change guitars, right? I was trying to think of that from a live perspective, but guitar changes are pretty typical. You just have some guy come out with your other guitar, you swap, you play, and then you swap the guitars back later. So, I don't know, maybe it is. It just feels very low tuned. It is just a heavy song in that regard. But what's interesting is that it's paired with a groove that's rather bouncy, and it gives it a little bit of levity that, at least pitch wise, it doesn't have. And so it feels light but weighty in a contradictory sort of sense. I find it to be a really interesting combination of characteristics for the track. It really makes me want to dig into, as usual, the lyrics. What is this about? What happened in the green fields of France? I'm assuming that this is about another battle that happened in World War One, but what is it specifically, and how could we attribute these ideas of weight and energy to that specific event? And this idea persists through pretty much every section of the track, with some of them getting heavier or lighter than others, but pretty much all staying within a general bounds of pretty weighty music. We have heavy emphasis on low notes. We have a large presence of a number of low notes. It could also just be some sort of a pitch pedal, too. Doesn't necessarily need to be tuned lower. Hmm. But yeah, we just have several sections of this where we have strong elements of groove and riffage. We have really strong riffage in here, which I thought was, again, interesting. I came in expecting constant 16th notes and ended up getting some really catchy death rhythms. So, yeah, it's a really interesting direction to go based on what I've also heard from them off of this same album. Um, see, this is track 10. This is the penultimate track on the album. Oh, that's pretty interesting. We listened to the second to the last, and last week we listened to the second track from the beginning. So we actually got a pretty nice picture of the beginning of the album because there's a 1 minute intro, and the end of the album there's a 1 minute outro. This is technically, as long as we're looking at full tracks, the first and last song off this album. Interesting. And they couldn't be further in direction either. The blackened elements do show up in here every once in a while, but it's a burst of energy, a quickly removed burst of energy. We usually get a full bar of the 16th note picking with 16th note bass kick and was it 8th note snares? Sometimes we get the blast beats on the snares. And then that's really about it. Then we return back to the groovy death riff. And so we don't really have any of that driving energy. The focus on atmosphere is in a completely different source here. We do have one section in the bridge that kind of sticks with the blackened composition for a little bit, but it's quickly removed too as we shift to a completely different idea, which is the industrial section, which is where we bring in all of these really metallic atmospheric sounds, clashes, and clangs. There's a ton of reverb here. I kind of associate it with industrial music, but I don't know if we can technically call it industrial. It's at least in my mind industrial influenced. And then it's also paired with the bagpipes, which are giving us the lead element here. And I want to save the bagpipes for a second because they show up in three very distinct, very different sections. I kind of want to contrast how it's utilized across the three of them. But yeah, we do have this really interesting bagpipes over industrial metallic sounds kind of thing going on that it feels even slower because it's juxtaposed against the only time we actually get a substantial amount of that blackened speed. But coming out of this section, we go to our outro, which I want to call Doom adjacent. Our tempo is ridiculously slow. The instruments are playing very slowly, very weighty. It's these slow, lethargic, heavy steps at the end of this track. And it feels like the song just kind of peters out here at the end. That's not to say that the song was ever driving. We have moments of driving intensity, but for the most part, it's sort of a meandering, energetic pace, which I know makes no sense. Meandering and energetic, but that's what the song says to me. It's not really trying too hard to get to a destination, but it's very energetic in that medium lethargy, uh, resilience, maybe reluctance, an energetic reluctance. Does that make sense? And it just slows down to a halt at the end. It just grinds until it gets slower and slower. And we do the bagpipe and industrial section, which kind of, I don't know, thinking about war, it reminds me of possibly being nearby an explosion and all the metal stuff kind of gets wiped out, and we get this industrial stuff that's hyper reverbed and sort of muffled. And it's sort of like if your ears are ringing after being too close to an explosion, possibly, or at least the stylized concept of that. I have no firsthand experience with that, but it's the way that media tends to portray it. Whether it's novels or film or video games, it tends to be the way that it's sort of showcased, at least on an auditory level, and sort of the disorientation of that, and then the metal music slowly fades back in and covers up that industrial sound, and then we get this slow plodding movement, almost as if we weren't just too close to the explosion, and our ears got damaged, but we could have actually been in the explosion. And now we are, very wounded and have a difficult time moving anywhere. That's kind of the gist I get from this, primarily through the lens of war, because I have the foreknowledge of knowing that that's what these people sing about. It's what they make music about. And so that's what the song generally feels like to me. Energetic reluctance to muffled disorientation to heavy, slow footsteps. That's the song in my ears. Now, the bagpipes I found to be quite interesting. We kicked off the song with bagpipes. We had a drone on the bottom and a melody on top. And this is actually what happens every time the bagpipes come in, whether it's during the black metal section or the industrial section or our intro where it's solo bagpipes. It is always two notes, a melody and a pedal tone. And the pedal tone never changes pitch at all. It is a single tone every time it comes in. I'm pretty sure the tone is actually the same every single time it comes in as well. I'm not sure what it represents. And as I've said a few times on the channel, I'm not 100% sure about the history of the bagpipes. Actually, no, we checked this out last time, didn't we? I don't remember what band it was. But we went and checked them out, and it has Scottish and Irish origins. I don't remember which one was more dominant, but it was present in both. France is not a place I would expect it, though. And so it's interesting to pair it with this idea of, what is this track called again? Oh yeah, the Green Fields of France. Unless, of course, it's possible that there was an Irish or Scottish army fighting on a French field. Maybe. Feels a bit of a loose connection there, but it's possible. Um, so the first time it comes in, though, it's very isolating. I wasn't a big fan of it. The melody didn't really make much sense. It kind of stopped and started in weird places, and there was some tonality things going on against the pedal note. But things started to click when we got to the metal sections with the bagpipes. When the bagpipe comes in with the metal, it's interesting because it is wholly separate from all of it and yet also intertwined. As far as production goes, it feels a bit separated from the rest of the music and is a bit jarring, I'd say, despite the fact that it works so well. Musically, compositionally, it's a fantastic counterpoint to what's going on around it. And see, this is an interesting thing because where this originally felt like an idea of isolation. I don't even remember if maybe the melody was copy pasted as well. I don't know. This idea, though, now feels intertwined with the events coming around. It is no longer by itself in a pocket, it is part of a larger idea. And it's interesting then to see how this evolves into the industrial section where the production of the whole bit is reverbed and sort of muffled and compressed. And like I'd mentioned, this sort of feels like a disorienting section. But the bagpipes are rather clear and present, where the industrial stuff is sort of left panned with some of the quieter stuff being right panned. The organs are center panned. They aren't reverbed. They aren't muffled. They aren't compressed. They are very audible. and in which case they now feel like a sort of determination. We can look at it again as a type of isolation, but this could be sort of finding strength within. Um, and I find that to be an interesting idea where we go from isolation to group back to isolation, but the isolation has changed now because of the journey of the song, or at least what I've interpreted of the song so far, knowing very little about the lyrics, just the idea that it's probably about a battle during a war in World War One. And so I just find that journey of the bagpipes to be very interesting. I don't have any particular meaning to ascribe to the first time we hear them in the intro. To me, they're isolationist in a way to set up the contrast in the metal section and then the twist in the industrial section. And in that way, it's designed primarily to be read against other ideas, in which case it doesn't have much meaning on its own there in the opening. But it's possible once we get to the lyrics, it'll make a little bit more sense why the bagpipes are alone in the beginning of a song. But right now, I don't have any read on that. Just kind of want to touch on everything a little bit right here as far as instrument wise. The guitar riffs were catchy, almost all of them. There's a great groove throughout all of this. We actually had two really strong groovy sections that, while being death, I think note wise, we could even call it a little bit of groove metal going on there as well. Just a really strong emphasis, not so much on notes, but on rhythmic features of the riff. Um, and so many good riffs in this track. I'm not a riff guy, right? I've said that before. I still stand by it. I'm here for melodies, not repeated cyclical ideas. But some riffs really catch me, and there were a couple in here. I was like, yeah, all right, let's go. I'm digging this. And that's really neat. The drumming in here was varied in a lot of different ways that I just have to give the drummer some praise for just their flexibility, and versatility. I mean, we heard them do pretty much straight up standard black metal on the second track that we listened to last week, and this one has some groovy moments, has more rigid moments. We have so many metric fluctuations as we shift from standard time to double time. The double time typically being more of a thrashier feel. We have the atmospheric type of playing that we had at the end, more emphasis on letting sounds ring out than continuously having attacks throughout. There's just a lot of variety there, and I think it's phenomenal. Bass, I missed the bass. I don't know if it wasn't loud enough. I don't know if a bass was in here. Could have been a production thing, could have been a me thing. I don't know. Unfortunately, I didn't hear the bass in it. And vocals actually had a bit of variety to them as well. None of the styles I particularly enjoyed out of the harshes, but it was nice to hear some fluctuation in the harsh attack. Death metal, at least to me, tends to be one of those genres, especially when you move into deathcore, which I think I have more experience with, so I might be extrapolating a little bit here. But death is one of those genres where, at least to my experience with it, vocalists tend to find one type of harsh that they can do very well and stick with it. And we tend to get very monotonous, but hopefully rhythmically interesting um, performances from the vocalist. And this one, we actually had quite a bit of variety in the vocal styles. Let's help change it up a little bit. So I'm going to take this moment to hit the lyrics, and then we'll wrap this up. So my read of the music was a little off. That's an understatement. It was a lot off. This is actually a cover of a track by the same name by Eric Bogle, who's a folk music maker. Way with words I've got. It tells a story. Well, it doesn't even tell a story. It asks a bunch of questions of a dead teenager who had let me back this up a little. Ask a lot of questions of a fictional dead teenager who fought in World War I. And it's told through the eyes of somebody who sits down next to his gravestone and begins rhetorically asking questions to no one, of course, but to this person named Willie McBride. It says, I see by your gravestone you were only 19 when you joined the Great Fallen in 1916. I hope you died well, and I hope you died clean, or young William McBride, or Willie McBride, was it slow and obscene? And it goes on to ask questions about how the funeral went. And it asks about what was left behind. Did you leave a wife or sweetheart? In some faithful heart is your memory enshrined. Although you died back in 1916, in that faithful heart are you forever 19? Or are you a stranger without even a name, enclosed and forever behind the glass frame, in an old photograph torn, battered, and stained, and faded to yellow in a brown leather frame? It asks, are you even remembered anymore? You specifically. I think you've picked up by now the rhyme pattern is exceptionally simple. It's consistently A A B B C C D D, where occasionally we'll see a repetition. Instead of just two lines rhyming, we might have four. I was gonna call this out when I was reading about it, and then I saw in the annotation that it was a cover, and I went and looked up who this Eric Bogle dude was, and I saw he was folk, and I was like, yeah, this way of writing, the rhyme scheme to it, it makes a lot more sense in a folk track than it does with death metal, especially when we compare it to what 1914, the lyrics that we checked out last time, which were overly simplistic, with not much of a rhyme scheme at all. This is very long, drawn out, repetitive, a pretty typical poetic rhyme scheme to it. It's a huge departure from the last time we heard this band and looked at their lyrics. So I mean, it was quite immediate to me that this was different. And yeah, someone else wrote the lyrics, so that makes perfect sense. So we've asked. We've sat down next to the gravestone. We asked them what their funeral was like. We asked them if they left anyone behind. And then he says, times have changed. The sun, now it shines on the green fields of France. There's a warm summer breeze that makes the red poppies dance. And look how the sun shines from under the clouds. There's no gas, no barbed wire. There's no guns firing now. And he goes on to talk about all the white crosses that still stand here, though. It's still kind of a no man's land. Not necessarily that no man will cross into it, but that no man is on top of it. It's now a graveyard. Um, and he says, this is sort of a monument to the blind indifference of man to his fellow man. It says to a whole generation that was butchered and damned. We come up to the big punchline. That's a weird way to phrase that. To the big point, the point of all of these rhetorical statements and questions. We get to the final stanza, and I want to read this word for word because I think it's very easy to understand what's being said, but I think it's important to hear the words that were written and not a paraphrasing or interpretation of it. He says, ah, young Willie McBride, I can't help wonder why. Do those that lie here know why did they die? And did they believe when they answered the cause? Did they really believe that this war would end wars? While the sorrow, the suffering, the glory, the pain, the killing and dying were all done in vain. For young Willie McBride, it all happened again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Reading this stuff out loud, I feel like I'm reading a Dr. Seuss book. No bearing on the analysis, just an interesting observation while reading some of this. But yeah, the whole point is This was the war to end all wars. This was the biggest war, the bloodiest, most destructive war. We had rules of engagement written after this one because of some of the atrocities or sorry, new rules of engagement that happened after this because of some of the atrocities that happened. This was just a disgusting war. Um, but it was supposed to be the one that ended everything. After this, we would have peace. Um, and he says, is that why you joined the cause? Is that what you thought you were fighting for? Um, because if that was why you fought, because you knew that even if you died, that this would be the last time the world would know fighting like this, your sacrifice was in vain. It was only like 20, 30 years later that World War II started. Once again, we had an entire world at war. I mean, the same thing happened, and then more wars continued on. We still have a world at war today. We don't have peace between all nations. It says that at the time this came out, and since then even, it has become one of the most popular anti-war songs. I think it is really interesting to think about that in the context of 1914. Granted, I have not listened to every song of theirs, I have not checked out all the lyrics to their music, but comparing it to the opening of this album, which looks at the inciting incident to World War One, not glorifying it, but simply presenting it, and the fact that this is a band that consistently writes lyrics about events in World War One, I think it's really interesting to end their latest album. This came out in 2021 with an anti-war song. I wonder if they do this in other albums as well, or if this is the first time that they've done uh, a song like this, whether it's of their own or a cover. It's really interesting to place it in the larger idea of the album, but also possibly the larger idea of their works in entirety. I will say this, though. I have no idea how the music pairs with this. What the music told me, I mean, even if we disregard my reading of the ending based on the idea that I thought they made, uh, you know, exclusively music about events in World War One. I don't know how to read that industrial section followed by the doom section against these sets of lyrics. Even the beginning half, the death section with the sparsely placed, blackened moments, I don't understand how that reluctance intensity, as I had mentioned it, has anything to do with sitting down on next to a gravestone and asking rhetorical questions of someone who passed fighting in this war. Um, I'm curious, if anything, if maybe there's some musical relationships to the original. Maybe that's actually where the bagpipes come in. Maybe there were no bagpipes in the original. I don't know. But it leaves me with a lot of questions about what their intentions were with this song on a musical level and how having these lyrics laid out in front of them led them to the composition that they did here. Those are my thoughts on 1914's The Green Fields of France. Let me know what you thought about this one. Down in the comments, leave your thoughts, your opinions, your perspectives, if you agree with me, disagree with me, any of that down there. Above the comment section is a description box. In there you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find ways to support the channel, a link to my music, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. Alright, we have a special selection coming up next. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow. We will continue on with bagpipes. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.